In AD 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. This signaled the end of the religion of Temple Judaism. From this catastrophe sprang two new religions: Rabbinical Judaism and Christianity.
My name is Paul George. I'm the author of a new book called Jesus of the Books, A Pragmatic History of the Early Church. This book is about the origins of Christianity, and what I've done is I've studied the ancient documents, looked at the evidence, and found that Jesus was in fact a literary character who was invented to fulfill ancient prophecies. What I've found is that there's no real hard evidence for Christians or Jesus to have existed in the first half of the first century. And there was a critical event, which was the Jewish war between the year 66 and the year 70, which actually catapulted the religion into existence. It was created as a sort of a comfort for the Jews, because they just had their city destroyed and their temple destroyed, and they were completely bereft of this rock that had sustained them for so many centuries. So psychologically, they were looking for some help from God, some message, some prophets, just some religious comfort. And so Christianity arose in that milieu. They do recognise that the critical event was the destruction of the temple, but they just haven't been able to link the invention of the religion and that event specifically. That most scholars would agree that that event was critical, but they don't seem to realise just how critical it was.
So you made the link?
So I made the link, yeah. There were no Christians in the first century up until the first record is about AD 79, where there's some graffiti written in Pompeii, on one of the walls in Pompeii, and the graffiti's no longer there. But according to the records at the time, somebody had seen some graffiti mentioning Christians. And we know that Pompeii was destroyed in 79. So that's the most direct evidence we have of Christians in existing in the first century. So if you move back in time, then there's a huge absence of these people. Where did they come from? There's no record of Jesus. There's no artifacts. There's no inscriptions. There's no coins. There's no documentary writings. Jesus never wrote anything, and so on. So it all points to the fact that the religion was invented late in the first century, certainly not in the first half of the century. There's no point Jesus being crucified while the temple sacrifices were continuing. And we know the temple sacrifices continued right up until the year 69. So theologically, Jesus would not have been expected to come until the temple sacrifices ceased, because the temple sacrifices made the Jewish people righteous. It's how they atoned for their sins. And clearly, Jesus replaced that. But he could only have replaced that after the year 69. So theologically, he must have come at that time. The apostles existed. The disciples are fictional characters who have been put into the gospel stories. The disciples are not mentioned in Paul's letters. The only leaders of the church who are mentioned in Paul's letters were leaders in Jerusalem and elsewhere. And these characters were, I believe, real characters, and they had a real role in the early church. But when the Gospels were written, some of these characters were written into the stories. For example, Peter was written in as a disciple of Jesus, and so on. But the reason for that was polemical, that there were certain trends and heresies within the church which had to be counteracted, and so they would use these characters to bolster certain opinions. My attitude is that this explanation is sympathetic to humans. I'm not criticising people for inventing a story. It's because this is what they did in order to survive psychologically. In fact, the message of the Bible, or the message of the New Testament, is love. And the reason for that was because of all the trauma that they'd experienced during the war, and the dispossession and the dislocation, and losing their families and so on. So the roots of the religion are in trauma, but the message is, if you like, a good message. This book is for anybody who's interested in the origins of Christianity, or if they're a practicing Christian or whether they're not, it doesn't really matter. It's a historical study. It aims at just presenting the truth.
The first Christians were Jews who interpreted the events of AD 70 as just punishment for the murder of Jesus. Naturally, this belief arose at the same time as the events. Like many other Jews, they also had expected the political Messiah. They were disappointed, but this was a temporary setback. A second coming was now expected, and this made them more fervent. As Festinger and co-workers discovered in their classic research published in When Prophecy Fails, disconfirmation of expected messianic events fortifies fervor and the desire to preach the word. This is counterintuitive, as we expect people to abandon the faith that makes failed predictions. We have no reason to doubt that the same mechanism was at work in the first century. We can say unequivocally that the cult of Jesus arose from the disappointment of the Messiah as King prophecies in the time of crisis.